And today we're going to be talking with 2022 Michigan Notable Book author, David Hardin. He's the author of Standpipe Delivering Water in Flint. And we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks again for being here, Dave. This is great.
Oh, thank you, Mindy, for having me. I appreciate it.
We've really enjoyed reading the book and having you participate in both Night for Notables, the author tour. I know there's many people out in Michigan who enjoyed seeing you at different libraries, so thanks again for doing all that.
It was really wonderful. I met really a lot of good people.
That's what I love to hear. I mean, I know that a lot of libraries were very excited to do the in-person programming again, so thanks again for that. We'll go ahead and just jump right in and get to hear from you about your writing process and different behind the scenes for the book. So tell us a little bit about your background and how did you become a writer?
Well, you know, I was a special educator for a lot of years, so I didn't come from, you know, the academy. I didn't study writing. I didn't go to Iowa. But writing, I came to writing in a kind of a roundabout way. It was oddly enough something I resisted for a long time, but it wouldn't leave me be. And I think I had, for the longest time, I had the delusion that I needed to get somebody's permission to do it. And of course, I needed my own permission to do it. But I got into it through poetry. And again, I didn't study poetry, but it seemed, for whatever reason, to really suit my thought, the way I thought, the way I could make associations. And anyway, I got into it through poetry. And poetry's become a real practice for me. I write most days, and
that's a lot of discipline. I was going to say.
Yeah, discipline. It's a practice, almost like I don't know, like yoga or meditation. But I derive just a lot of joy from it. Yeah.
I love it. You know, it's interesting too, having had some of these conversations. How many authors say, you know, that they resisted it or they had to give themselves permission? And
Well,
it's a very common sense.
I'm not the only one.
No, you're not. I was thinking specifically Betsy Bird. You know, she's like, I'm going to be a writer, and then she found out how little they made, and then she's like, I don't want to be a writer, and then finally she's like, you know what? I just love it too much, and I've got to come back to it. So. Well,
as far as having a career as a writer, it never occurred to me.
Really?
It never occurred to me that it was even a possibility for me, and it started out as just more of an avocation. But you know, this book began to develop, and it appeared to me, it occurred to me somewhere along during that process that it could be, you know, something I could do, and it actually might be of interest to people.
Yeah.
Besides me.
And it sure was. And I mean, I guess it's wonderful to hear about like why you write, of how you just had to write it, you were called to it, and it kind of became a practice.
Well, it was a nagging thing always in the back of my mind that I would stay away from it for a long time, but to get pulled back. But before I knew it, I was doing it with regularity and almost secretly.
It's funny. It's interesting to me that it was kind of secret. Is there like a little bit like,
yeah, like you know, you're squirreled away somewhere, you know, doing this forbidden thing, you know, and yeah.
It's so funny. I mean, it's wonderful to hear about that. I mean, in your writing process, you talk about how you're a regular writer, and you do it every day. Is there anything else that makes your process different or unique, or your process, I guess?
I write generally 5 days a week. I start the day with poetry, and without fail, I try to have something that I'm working on every day, and I might take 2 weeks to polish a poem and finish it, or 3 weeks. But and then the other writing I do, prose writing, I suppose, I do that in the afternoons.
Oh, it's interesting. You have poetry mornings and prose afternoons.
Somehow it's developed that way, and I've gotten better about allowing myself that time. And I'm retired.
That
you know, I tried writing when I was working, and I would get up really early to do that, and it didn't work as well. But I'm really privileged. I have time. I'm able to do it financially, and I don't have to rely on it.
That's wonderful, though, that you're able to do that, and you take advantage of it. That's
and I'm
what's
grateful.
important.
I don't take it for granted ever.
Yeah, that's good. I guess you know, we've heard a little bit about your process. How did you get the idea for this book?
Standpipe came about. I was volunteering in Flint at the height of the water crisis with the Red Cross. I was a Red Cross volunteer, and I can get in later on. I can get into why I did that, but I was meeting a lot of interesting people every time I went there, and I should probably just say that my job was to drive. They call it an ERV, an emergency relief vehicle. They're the red and white Red Cross trucks you always see in a disaster. Anyway, I would deliver water to the homes of people who couldn't go to a distribution center to get their own water. And they were totally reliant on somebody bringing water to their homes. Either they were too poor to have a car, to have transportation, or they were too disabled, or something got in the way of them getting water. So it was absolutely essential. Anyway, that was my job. So I was meeting people every time I was there in their homes, and you know, they were feeling isolated, and I never ever just dropped the water off and left. I spent time with people, 5-10 minutes, maybe even longer, and I didn't want to forget them. And I started writing down, thinking about them on my. I live 70 miles from Flint, so I had time on the way back, and I would think about them, and I would write down later on who they were, what we talked about, my impressions of them, and not just the people in Flint, but my colleagues with the Red Cross. I met a lot of interesting people in the truck. So it started out that way, and before long, I had quite a collection of vignettes, and I started to polish them, and it gave me. I discovered that I'm enjoying this. This could turn in. Maybe it can turn into something, and things developed. And I know Thomas Lynch, not well, Michigan poet Thomas Lynch, and well enough to impose on him. And I asked him to take a look at it, what I had, and he was generous. You know, he thought it had merit, but he pointed out that it needed another element to make it snap and to bring it alive. And for the longest time, I didn't know what that was. But then I can be a bit slow. It occurred to me that my mother and I she had went through a long illness, and she passed away just as the water crisis in Flint was blowing up. And I was, and as it blew up, I was grieving her loss, and I decided that, or it seemed obvious to me, that if I can weave together our story and the story of my experience in Flint, that might be the thing to bring both of those stories to life, and that's how I approached it.
Right, and it gives a lot of clarity too, what you were experiencing, and then what a lot of other people are experiencing too. That sort of that individual experience combined with the communal experience. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
I think many people also would agree, but you know, that's my personal opinion. And for you, so it's a memoir, but it is also, there's a little more going on. How would you define this work?
Well, and I wrote this down. It's a memoir filtered through poetry, tragedy, and humor. And I hope there's enough of all those things in the book to make it shine. I purposely wrote it in shorter vignettes that seemed to me to be punchy and lyrical, I suppose. But there were some longer meditations, I call them, about my family, primarily my mother. And I don't want to go too much into that here.
You don't want people to read it.
Well,
Yeah.
My mother and I had kind of I use the word estranged. We became estranged over the years, and not in a real dramatic way, but just that things seemed to happen and evolve in our family that caused us to drift apart. And we didn't live in the same state. She had moved. I'm a Michigan native. She and my father had immigrated here from down south, and people often don't talk about, or I think sometimes people don't view that as immigration, but they were immigrants to a different country. From rural Tennessee where they grew up. Anyway, she had moved back there after my father died, so we didn't see a lot of each other. But she started to have some minor illnesses that blossomed into some more serious things, and I started to. I found myself traveling back and forth to support her and visit her, and we were both trying to reclaim what we had lost in that time, but by that time she was older and she didn't feel well, and I was still not sure how to make that connection. And I've lost my train of thought. But that part of the book, I wanted to be as honest as I could be, but still be fair and honor her memory. And, but I had a lot of, I'll just jump back, I had a lot of anger. And anger is what got me to Flint. I remember the morning I was listening to NPR, our local NPR station, and my mother had just died a few months before, and Flint was really blown up, and people in the city were angry, and I was getting angry listening to the news reports, and I happened to have had some surgery that kept me off my feet for a few months, a couple of months. I couldn't do anything, and I remember thinking, as soon as I can walk again, I'm gonna do something. I'm gonna go to Flint. But it was out of anger. I needed an outlet, and I didn't realize it at the time. It just seemed like a real obsession for me.
It was the kind of your way of dealing with that anger and feeling like you could do something to help somebody else. I was doing something
to help somebody else, but I was doing it to help myself too. And
sometimes it takes a book to realize, that's what I was doing.
Well, it's funny, I heard this about another author, and I don't remember the author, but it was a woman, and she was talking before a book group, I think, kind of a woman's book group, and they were asking her questions like you're asking me right now, and they were making some observations about her book, and she was saying later that she was astounded that the things that the observations they were making were things that hadn't occurred to her. They were true. She wrote the book, but those things hadn't occurred to her until other people were giving their impressions, and
she was like,
I don't know what you call that, but it's not unusual. I think
it is. Sometimes it's taking that third-party perspective. It's having somebody else look at you and saying, "Hey, do you realize that you do this?" And
exactly.
No, I've never. It's just something you did.
Exactly. And maybe there's some unconscious awareness, but to have it verbalized, you
brings it out into the light.
Yeah.
I know. I love that about works, though. It's like once you write something, it's out there, and
it lives on.
It lives on, and you may not have necessarily realized you were saying when you were saying it. Someone reads it and it speaks to them in maybe a different way, or they have seen a different piece of your work than you maybe didn't even notice.
Exactly.
Yeah, it takes on a life of its own.
Yeah, like a child, when a child moves away from home, and they have their own life, and they become their own person in ways that you might not always be happy with it.
Yeah.
Sometimes the opposite. So
Yeah, it's true. Sometimes you're like, oh, as we have a friend who says, I accept no credit, or I take no credit, I accept no blame. And so my husband is taking
T-shirts made up.
I know, right? So, you know, as you're defining this work and you're talking through kind of the process of getting it together, what would you say was the hardest part of your experience?
I would have to go back to what I said about anger, dealing with anger. You know, without going into a great deal of detail, I grew up sort of denying the fact that I was angry. Wasn't really allowed, felt like I wasn't allowed to have that emotion. And so writing the book, those feelings, I was writing directly about them, and they were undeniable. And so learning how to look at them and have those feelings in an honest way was probably the most difficult part of writing about the book. And I also, in writing the book, I really wanted to make sure that I was I didn't want to come off as exploiting Flint, the city proper, or the people I was meeting. I think sometimes, even with like Detroit, you know, the idea of what's the term that they use? Decay porn, or
yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I didn't want to come off like appearing as if I were feeding on the carcass and trying to, you know, use what I was seeing as a way to, you know, feather my own bed. That's the right way to put it.
Yeah.
So that was sort of paramount.
Yeah.
I think for me.
And trying to really honor the people.
Honor, yeah, that's a better way to put it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, but I get what you're saying, because we have, I mean, there's been times that I've read books where it is sort of like, is this really about the people that you're saying you're trying to help, or is this about you as the author, you know? And that did not come across in yours.
Oh, good. I was really conscious of it. And there goes my train of thought.
I know, right?
It'll come back.
It'll come back. Don't worry, we've got plenty of other conversational questions, so keep thinking about it. You know, you talked about the hardest part. What was probably your favorite part of this book?
Oh, that's easy. The vignettes and my impressions of the people I was meeting every day. I found that immensely satisfying to write about those people and try to, in a few quick brush strokes, give readers an idea of who they were.
Yeah.
You know, what was on their mind at that time, how they were viewing their situation, and to make sure, to try my best to bring out their humanity and diversity.
Yeah.
You know, I'm guilty of, you know, looking at a city like Flint and thinking of it monolithically, and it was anything but. You know, I met all kinds of people with different views and surprising views at times.
Yeah, I think that's what's great when you get to really delve into a community and you look at it and try to, you know, get rid of the lens of what you've always viewed that community to be like, and really just step into their shoes and see what things are like and hear from them.
Exactly.
It's amazing how much you learn and you realize that, oh, the life and this world and this community is way more complex than I ever thought it was.
And that's always true. I think I never would have gotten to Flint. I've been in Flint a few times before I went there to volunteer, but I didn't know the city. And I had assumptions, probably like a lot of people, but I got, you know, from the news and from hearing other people talk. And I was wrong on all of it.
Yeah.
And I did, the thing I wanted to point out earlier was, there are a lot of good books about the Flint water crisis. Dr. Mona Hanna-Atish's book, and its name just...
What the Eyes Don't See?
What the Eyes Don't See.
You're like,
The Poison City by Anna Clark. I recommend them both, but those are really good journalistic, first-hand accounts of what went on. My book is really a memoir, and that really focuses on small day-to-day details of people in Flint. And you know, I hope readers, if they read it, people will get it'll give them just a different dimension and a different flavor of what went on there. I really don't get into the politics of it. I don't really get into the how it happened and the series of bad decisions that were made that resulted in this ongoing crisis. It's not over yet.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think you're right. I mean, there's been other works that have done it very well and have really shown that. And you're like, why reinvent the wheel? Right? Like, if someone's already got that covered.
I'm not a reporter.
Yeah.
And I couldn't have done it. I don't have the skills to do what some people have done.
Yeah. You brought your perspective and your experience. And
yeah, as a poet, I think, you know, I'll call myself a poet. That's where I write from. And these aren't expressly poems, but I think that they possess a lyrical, rhythmic sensibility.
I think when I read that, and then I was, we did research on you, and I was like, oh, he's a poet. And I was like, that makes sense. You're like, as you're reading this, it is very lyrical. So I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So it's wonderful. And what does it mean to you to have been selected as a Michigan Notable Book author?
It wasn't even on my radar. I knew about the program, and I think I knew that the publisher of the book had, as kind of a routine, had submitted the book. But I hadn't thought about it at all, and I got a notice from the publisher back in January, I believe. Yeah. And it took me a while to even process what they were talking about, and I guess I'm still not fully there. But it validates, it's great. It validates the work, certainly. But it feels wonderful to be part of one author among many wonderful authors down through the years, and to be part of that pantheon, I guess. Feels pretty darn good. But I wish, books about my mother, my parents a bit, and I wish they're no longer here. I wish they would have been alive to share in, my joy. I think they would have appreciated it.
It's a little bittersweet in that sense.
Yeah, I like the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I like to go big on bittersweet.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's life, right? Well, that's wonderful to hear. I'm glad that it means as much to you as it. Well, I mean, it means a lot to us as the Library of Michigan to be able to say, hey, Michigan has a rich literary heritage, and we have some excellent authors, and to be able to highlight you all and encourage people to read the literature of this great state. I mean, that's one of my favorite parts about the job. So I'm really glad to hear that it means as much to you. It's
been, and I'll just, we talked earlier, but I did the library tour this summer. And I'm glad I did it. It was a way for me to scare myself. I was frightened, preparing, reflecting. I had to reflect on the book and my process, and part of me didn't want to do it, but I did it, and I was really glad I did. I met wonderful people, got to see some really great libraries, and talk to some really interesting people. So
see some new communities in Michigan too.
Yes, that I hadn't been to.
Yeah.
I've been to a lot, but I hadn't been.
New places, check off the list.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I guess this is your chance to really tell a little bit more why you think people should read your book. What's your little elevator pitch, shall we say?
I think that, well, I guess if people have an interest in Flint at all, and what went on there and what continues to go on there, and they want to get beyond the the headlines and the repertorial writing, they might read Standpipe and come away with a better understanding of who was affected by this. We all know generally who was affected by it: people of color, poor people of color, generally, who have been, who have really been taking the brunt of years of political indifference. But among them, there are individuals who have rich lives, and my book, I think, might give people a different perspective on who they are, and what they're thinking.
Yeah, those human
And
stories.
how they're living their lives. Yeah.
Well, what readers do you find yourself reading? Or
Oh,
what writers do you find yourself reading?
Yeah, well, they're probably readers too.
Yeah, I would hope so.
And I wrote these down, but I'm not even going to look.
Yeah.
I just finished Cloud Cuckoo Land.
Cloud Cuckoo Land.
By Anthony Dewar.
Okay.
And it was wonderful. I recommend it. And if, I also, it's of a piece, in my mind, with The Overstory by Richard Powers.
Okay.
They both have an environmental theme, but they're well written, and I'm still thinking about them, having finished the books. But writers I keep going back to over and over and over are people like Jim Harrison, Wendell Berry, Thomas Lynch, Richard Russo, Ann Patchett, and poets Charles Sinek and Billy Collins, who I love. And I'm getting ready to read, the late Barry Lopez has a new collection out, and I'm going to forget the name. It's Embracing the Burning World. And I'm waiting for my copy to come out.
Oh, you're ready.
But yeah, I can't, if you're a painter, you can't draw enough. And I do a bit of painting, but I don't do enough drawing. But drawing really informs your painting. As a writer, you can't read enough, in my opinion. And I try to make the time to do as much reading as I can.
Yeah, I love that. I'm talking with one of the other authors who's at Night for Notables, Colby Cedar Smith, who did Call Me Athena, girl from Detroit. She was saying, I was kind of asking her about her next projects, and she's like, I'm just listening. She's like, I've been reading everything and just listening. And that's kind of, I think...
We don't do enough listening.
No.
I don't do enough listening.
And I think that's such an essential part of, then being able to write sometimes is when to know to not write, in a way.
When to be still.
Yeah,
When to be quiet.
so,
Yeah.
So it's wonderful. Well, thank you for your reading recommendations and for telling us a little bit more about your writing process and about the book itself. I mean, I hope if people haven't read it, please do pick it up. It's Standpipe Delivering Water in Flint.
The cover, by the way, if I could
tell me about the cover.
The publisher did the cover. I didn't have any input in on the cover, but I just love the simplicity and spareness of design.
I agree. I was actually is one of the covers
It
that
sort of says it all, I think.
Yeah, it does. It's wonderful. Well, thank you again for being here today.
Thank you, Mindy.
Yeah, and for writing your book, and we look forward to any future publications as well. So
I'm working on it.
yeah, that's what we love to hear. Well, thanks again.
Thank you.